Well, welcome once again. This is the Doctor of Digital, the Doctor of Digital podcast. The purpose of the show is to transform your business and life with education and inspiration. I introduce busy business leaders to trends in business, technology, and marketing to highlight people you should know. Have you ever felt pressured to start a podcast for your business, but found yourself hesitating due to the perceived workload and time commitment? In this coming episode, we'll dive deep into the world of reluctant podcasting with an expert who understands the unique challenges faced by entrepreneurs and marketing managers. Discover how you can transform podcasting from a daunting task into a strategic, efficient, and effective tool for achieving your business goals without letting it consume your identity or overwhelm your schedule. My guest is the mastermind behind the Podcasting for Business virtual conference, an event that brings together industry experts to provide targeted training and support for business podcasters. With years of experience producing podcasts for others before reluctantly starting their own, my guest offers a refreshing perspective on podcasting as a functional business activity rather than a passion project. The approach focuses on clear goal setting, outcome optimization, and metric tracking to ensure that your podcast delivers tangible results for your business. Whether you're a seasoned podcaster or considering taking the plunge, this episode promises to revolutionize your approach to audio content marketing. During this episode, we'll do a deep dive into the changes and hot topics of business podcasting, and I encourage you, of course, to leverage the expertise of my guest and how to navigate the unique dynamics of the field. By the end of this episode, you'll be better equipped to know what to do, and I encourage you to contact my guest, Megan Dougherty, the reluctant podcaster, for the Podcasting for Business conference. With that, I want to welcome Megan to the program. How are you today?
Oh, I'm so well, Mick, and thank you for having me, and thank you for that wonderful intro. I might steal some of that verbiage. That was
Well,
awesome.
absolutely. I've written one or two things in my life, and sometimes it's good stuff. So I'm glad to hear that as well. I'm really curious. I mean, there's one of these things because I actually have gone through your book and reviewed it. It's also up there on Twitter and Facebook. But you have a really unique approach here. So I'm wondering,
Thank you.
how does a person get to be the reluctant, but then an expert on podcasting? What's that pivotal moment all about?
It's interesting. I was thinking about kind of what are the pivotal moments that brought me to this space because I never set out to become a podcasting expert. I wasn't a little
Yeah.
girl dreaming about creating audio content or even being on TV or being famous. I had a little assembly line in a pillow fort that I had I liked business, I like structure, I like process. So
Okay.
when I did get into podcasting, which I did because an old colleague from a marketing company that I'd worked at said, "Hey, you want to start a business together?" And I said, "Well, with you, I'd love to." And we figured out, what do we need to do? Her background was in broadcast audio, mine was in digital marketing, so we did
All right.
podcasts for business owners. And the problem that we came into, that we ran into again and again and again, is what does success mean for these businesses that we're
Sure.
working on? Because the metrics of success for podcasting generally are how many downloads do you have? Like, what's your
Yes.
reach? How many countries are you in? How much sponsorship money do you make? That doesn't matter much to your average HR consultant or accountant, but they are podcasting. They've got people who are listening to them. So we're like, how do we attribute the value that a podcast creates to
Okay.
the business? And so that was kind of what started the thinking. And it took a couple of years. There wasn't, I think, a single defining moment where we're like, these are the business podcast blueprints. But over lots of experimentation and research, we kind of determined there are specific ways to understand that value and to optimize for more of it.
It's good. So, I mean, I started following you because I started seeing all the quality that you were producing in terms of content. So, I'm really curious about podcasting in general, obviously, but
Mhm.
it's changed a bit. So, I'm wondering what you could talk about the change. Some people say podcasting age is over. Some say no, people should be jumping in. So, where are we? What are the changes that are going on in podcasting today?
Gosh, there have been so many. So we've been doing this since 2017, so about 7 years at the time of this recording, and just the scale of podcasting as an industry has exploded over that time. So
Hmm.
now, when we started, we had to explain a lot what a podcast was and how it worked, and we almost
Right.
never have to do that anymore. So there's a great understanding. There's a lot more sophistication about
Right.
what a podcast is, how it works, how you can access them, and how you can use them in business. And other changes that have happened in the last couple of years, I'm sure you've noticed video podcasting. You have a video podcast yourself,
Right.
is much more popular than it used to be. And
Right.
so now there's, when someone says, oh, I've got a podcast, you have to ask, oh, audio or video or both. Where before it was you had a podcast, it was audio. That was the end of the story. And of course, AI is changing the way people are, conceiving of ideas, writing scripts, editing their audio, creating their notes. And that's a whole other topic, which I think we'll be getting to.
Yeah, that what's interesting. I'm kind of the reluctant video person. So years and years ago, I was in broadcasting. I said I was in college, and I walked in. There was a TV department and a radio department. They said, "Well, you obviously have a face for radio." So I said, "Thank you very much," because I'm reluctant to be on video, but I've seen that, so I've jumped on there. But I'm now curious about what you're saying, as you mentioned AI, or maybe some other things
Mhm.
too. In the state of the industry today, what would you say are some of the hot growth areas of podcasting? What should a podcaster be thinking about today?
Yeah, they should be thinking about. I mean, AI brings a lot of efficiency to an operation, but it as I'm sure you know, and as I'm sure everyone listening know, it lacks discernment and a sense of objective reality, which means that often when you're using it to do something like create your show notes, AI right now in podcasting is most popular for creating the assets that go around an episode. It's still not great at editing audio itself, although that day is coming.
Mhm.
So it'll create show notes, it'll create social shares, it'll create blog posts and articles based on your work, but it's going to be really close to right, but it's not going to be right. And so I find very often that the time investment of fact checking AI work, especially for a single, like for multiple shows, is it's easier just to have a human do it the first time. But if you are like a solo producer and you're only working with your own voice and you can really train a language model to understand you, it can be a really effective way to get that first draft out the door. So I think it's great for solo practitioners or in-house podcasts, and less good for someone like me at the agency model.
So, are you saying that it's because you can see this on AI too? There's caveats now at the bottom saying things like, well, sometimes we hallucinate, make sure you double check. So,
And I find that it's the type of mistakes that it makes, especially when it's reviewing and trying to create content based on audio content. It'll be a tiny little error, like it will misattribute a quote, or it will say someone works at the wrong company, or it'll misspell a guest name, and that kind of thing is quite hard to catch unless you're really paying attention on that QA listen and the quality assurance step, because there's subtle errors, and you read it, and if you hadn't listened to the audio, it looks fine. So it can be really difficult to kind of keep that high level of quality that, especially as a business podcaster, you want to have. Because if you are podcasting to build relationships with people, which is one of kind of,
hmm,
our main ways to do it, you don't want to spell their name wrong. You don't want to say that they work for the wrong company, because then instead of having a follow-up email, hey, do you want to talk about a collaboration? You're apologizing for getting that information wrong. And that's not what you want to be doing with your podcast.
where you want no mistakes. I find this pretty typical. I try to find references in books for potential guests, and then they said, well, it turned out that book doesn't even exist. So that's something you do not want to put online.
It's not a good look. Not a very good look at all.
It's terrible for a business to do that. I'm really curious because you do have a lot of things, especially I want to tap into the book here a little bit too. So you have a very unique approach, some groundbreaking ideas. Could you tell us a little bit about the development of the metrics and all the things that will go into being successful for a business podcaster?
I'd love to, and it came a little bit from the concept that you introduced me with, which is the reluctant podcaster. Someone who is podcasting, they may enjoy it; it may be a nice part of their day, but like, you don't get up in the morning and think, "I'm so excited I get to be a podcaster today."
Yeah.
It's you've got a business to run. You're a business owner. You do whatever your expertise is, and the podcast is a tool to help you do it better. And so when you look at podcasting as a tool that you're leveraging for specific outcomes, there's a couple of things that you are empowered to do. And the first is decide what those outcomes are going to be. Because a podcast that looks the same on the surface can do many different things for a business. It can connect you with potential referral partners or clients. It can connect you with other influences in your space. It can get you promotional opportunities. It can get you authority, SEO. I can go on and on and on. But the idea is you have to choose which of those is the most important, and which are you going to be trying to get more of, and how are you designing a show to help you achieve those specific goals. When you do that, all of a sudden you've got piles and piles and piles of beautiful data that's telling you how well your podcast is performing at your business goals. And this was something that we found was largely missing in the podcast industry as a whole, because the metrics that people were tracking and the data they were collecting was all external to the business. And so we flipped that on its head and decided we need to start with what the business needs and what the business is trying to achieve and design podcasts that do that. And then you are only evaluating the success or failure of a show based on your own criteria rather than something external.
Now, that's what I find really fascinating too, and I think it's really valuable. Could you tell us a little bit about, because you do go into some detail of breaking
Just a
down,
little.
yeah, just a little. There are several goals that you are trying, and you can put a podcast in one of those. Could you tell us about those? Because I think that's really valuable stuff there.
Absolutely. So the overarching model we call the business podcast blueprints, and they are 5 of them. They're kind of high level archetypes for
Mhm.
podcasting, and we always encourage people to choose one. They are relationship building, audience engagement, thought leadership, conversion, and content. And so to really quickly describe them, a relationship building show, its primary goal, its main reason for existing is to connect you with other people, like on a one-to-one level. Audience engagement is to connect with many people, an audience that you already have or that you have access to, or who is finding you by some other means, but it's kind of one to many rather than one to one. A thought leadership show is to establish your authority and reputation. Conversion show is to get people kind of from one state, like a stranger to a listener or to a list member or to a customer. And then a content show is just to create content that might fuel other marketing activities. And you want to choose one of these because sometimes the individual things that you can do to make a show better for one particular purpose is going to make it less good for another purpose. So you choose one, and that is kind of your final decision maker. We call it the decision filter for everything that you're going to decide. And that means your show is going to be focused, it's going to be aligned. Everything that you're going to do with it is going to help you advance towards those goals. And then within that, as is in the book, we've got 15 individual business outcomes that we call the metrics. And these are things that you can optimize a show for and track to see how you're doing. And they each work better or worse with the different blueprints that are kind of the overarching decision filter.
And then how do you move from the one that you chose to the metrics, and how do you value the success, or how do you evaluate the success from that as a result?
That's where it gets really fun, especially if you like spreadsheets. So you kind of choose your overarching goal is, and that is basically every time you make a decision about your podcast, you're going to ask yourself the question: is it going to help me achieve this? So if I'm doing an audience engagement podcast, every decision I make is: should I optimize for downloads? Will having more downloads help me engage my audience? Yes, no, or maybe. And when you use that as the process to make decisions about what you're going to do for your show, and you always make sure that you're choosing something that's yes or at least maybe, you're going to make all of the work that you put in, all of the time, the money, the energy is going to be for a purpose. And you're going to have things that you can track to see what is the return on that investment you're making. So another example, let's say I had a relationship building show. And so my podcast, my primary reason for doing it is to build relationships like we're doing right now. We're chatting, we're getting to know each other.
Sure.
And my podcast is totally designed to do that. Well, then should I have sponsors, for example? Is having a sponsor going to help me build more and better relationships with people I need to grow my business? No. Sponsorship is going to take away attention from whatever else is going on. So it's going to take my time away from networking. It's going to take my time away from promoting the guest because I'll have to be promoting the sponsor. So it's not going to help. And when you make that kind of discernment between what is useful and what isn't for a particular business, then all of the work that you're doing is valuable, and it's all work that you can count.
And I think one thing you're identifying, I love the expression of saying, rather than having a passion project, this is actually something which is efficient and a business tool. And that's what I
Yeah.
really think you're centering in on. That really is very insightful.
Thank you. That was kind of one of the big shifts for us and it happened only a couple of years ago when we realized we're not really a podcast company. Like, we produce podcasts. That is the mechanism by which we provide value to our
Right.
clients, but it's content marketing. It's a marketing tool. Podcasts are the vehicle we use to achieve other goals, whether that is business development or product sales or authority building or attention getting. It's just a tool. And so when you kind of shift it from a podcast is a thing that exists and has its own objective criteria for success or failure to this is a tool that I'm using to do things in my business. So the only criteria that matter are the ones for me and my business. It gives you so much more possibility with what you can do with the show. It becomes really fun to design something that is hyper specific to what you need.
Why is podcasting, in your opinion, better than some other things that a business does? In other words, you can do digital marketing, you can
Mm.
run ads, you can do all kinds of things. So be the advocate for podcasting. I say to a business, why should you start a podcast? Why should you be involved in this?
Well, I mean, I think that that's really the first question is, should you podcast? Because there are going to be some businesses and some situations where it's not going to be the best thing.
Hmm.
Like say if your most immediate business need is I need 10 clients yesterday, a podcast is not a great investment to do that really, really quickly. There's other things you should be doing. But if what you need is kind of what one of the business podcast blueprints represents, if it is content, if it's conversions, if it's relationships, then over time, 6 months to a year, you can design a show that is going to do that. And so if what you need for your business, and that's where I always want people to start. I don't want them to start because, the firm down the street has a podcast, we should have a podcast too, or podcasting is
Right.
cool, even though podcasting is cool. It's what does my business need? Can a podcast help me achieve it in a time frame that works? And if the answer to
Mhm.
that is yes, then go for it. But I think it's really important to make that decision because a lot of shows get started with a lot of enthusiasm, but there's not a lot of strategy behind them. And so
Sure.
after 3 or 4 months, everyone's exhausted. You've got all this content, but you don't have any business results. And so you've spent all this time and money, and you're like, okay, we've done cool things, but did it do anything? We
Mm.
don't know. But you can get so much out of it if you are kind of you do have to rigorously pay attention to how it's happening. Are you following up with your guests and building that relationship and taking them to the next step? Um, the podcast can be an engine. It can be a flywheel of whatever you need in your business. And so what I love the most about it is that it's an efficient way to do a lot of things at one time. So every episode, you're relationship building, but you're also creating content that's going to be serving your audience perhaps for years down the line. And it's going to be fueling your social media channels so that your team doesn't have to do it. It's going to be answering questions so that you don't have to spend all your day in your inbox. You can just direct people to your podcast. So I love podcasting because it's efficient to do a lot of different things. And it is, when you start thinking about it as a tool, it's a highly trackable and customizable way to do it. It's like the ultimate multi-tool.
Right. So, okay, I'm the business owner. I'm now convinced by you. Could you offer me some actionable tips that I could take away today from what you're saying and your perspective?
Absolutely. So the first thing you're going to sit down, if you've got a podcast already, you're going to say, what does my business need from a podcast? And you're going to, is it my main reason for podcasting? Is it to connect with other people? Is it to nurture my audience or my leads? Is it to become an authority in my space? So when you figure out what is that most important thing that you had hoped your podcast was going to provide to your business, sit down and be really honest with yourself. Is it doing that? And is it doing that in a way that you can point to some data and say, actually, yes, it is connecting me with 4 new people every month, and one of those becomes a referral partner. That's amazing. That's the level of granularity you want for whatever your goal was. And so step 1, make sure that's happening. If you don't have a podcast, then the tip what I'd like you to do, if you're thinking about it, we call it feeling pod curious. Um, you know, think about, what do I need for the business over the next 6 months to a year? Can a podcast realistically help me achieve that? And if so, go ahead and take the plunge, go for it, and start designing a show that is going to achieve that. But whatever your goal is, and whatever kind of wherever you are in terms of being a podcaster and not being a podcaster, being a future podcaster, you want to have a good idea in your mind of what is success going to mean for me and my business, and what is failure going to mean for me and my business, say
Mhm.
after a year, because you don't want to just go on after this forever. Like it's podcasting does not work for every single business. So you want to protect your investment by knowing when you're going to pull the plug if it hasn't worked. And I think that's one of the most important things that you can do to protect your own interests as a podcaster. And I say this, as a producer who does this for money, you want to know if it's working. And if it doesn't working, you didn't fail. It was just a project that didn't work.
Mm.
So I think that's what people should do right now.
Well, now I'm really curious. I mean, somebody is now convinced they're the business person. They're saying, yes, I should start. So I'm curious how they get a hold of you. I also want to make sure you get a chance to plug that conference. If I'm not mistaken, something's coming up. Is that right? Tell us about it.
There's a bunch of things coming up. So you very kindly mentioned the book Podcasting for Business, which is releasing September 10th of this year, either before or after the release of this episode. And the Podcasting for Business conference is the 3rd annual event where we bring together experts, including the Doctor of Digital, Mick Smith himself, who's going to be a panelist on one of our discussions about SEO and discoverability. Who's going to be panelist? I'm sorry, let me correct that, about topics, titles, and CTAs. Apologies, Nick. And that's happening in November this year. It's all online. It's all recorded because as a business owner, you may not be able to go to an event for 3 days and talk about how awesome podcasting is. So what we're doing instead is making it online. There's networking events, there's learning, there's workshops. It's going to be a really good time, and you're more than welcome to attend.
Outstanding. And is there a way to get a hold of you directly, or do people just want to understand your business and help themselves, or how they can find assistance from you?
Absolutely. Everything is at podcastingforbusiness.com. Any contact form on the site goes directly to my own inbox. And I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn, so I'd be happy to chat with you there too.
Yes, make sure you check out those articles. They're phenomenal. So thank you so much, Megan, for taking out some time. I know you're busy, got a lot of things going, a lot of coals in the fire, as they say, but thanks for being my guest. I appreciate you coming on today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise. All right. See you next time. If you like the kind of things that you're hearing on the Dr. Digital podcast and you want to have more people like Megan and the phenomenal work that she is doing, make sure that you like, subscribe, positively review, and share the Dr. Digital podcast with others. I'd like to thank also the sponsors who are publishing Burning America and also On Track Ian Hunter. And of course, if you want to know more about me and what I do, well, I'm also willing to help as well too. I help business leaders, CEOs, and entrepreneurs break through their obscurity through oral and written presentations, building credibility and authority. You can see me on Mastering Presentation Secrets on Facebook. Until next time, this is Dr. Digital signing off. Deus Volt.